was 15 years old, I got a really bad mark on something in my art class and the teacher told me that I was not good at art. 2 years ago, I would never call that a trauma. It is a trauma because trauma's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you.
Penny Locaso is a behavioral scientist, TEDx speaker, and the creator of the world's first intentional adaptability framework. Her evidence-based approach to redefining leadership has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, Australian Financial Review, and Women's Agenda.
It got me thinking into defining fear, because how do we define fear?
Fear is built in. It is a built-in warning system. And it goes back to when we were cave people. They found that there's another automatic response, which is very common in women, which is called fawning. And what happens is when we feel threatened, we will automatically kick into people-pleasing overdrive. The happiest people in the world are those who are emo-diverse. And what that means is emotionally diverse. And this is proven by the science. And what we mean by emotionally diverse is that
Before we dive into this conversation, please give me just 20 seconds. I know you've got hundreds of podcasts you could listen to, but any point during Unlayered, you paused and thought, that was me, or I felt that too. I'd love to ask a quick, simple favor. Please help me with a follow or subscribe to my channel, because that one click will not only help me bring more conversations to you, but for others who might need it. And it means the world for this work to continue. Thank you so much. Enjoy the conversation. Penny, welcome to Unlayered. Really honored to have you podcast, and thanks for accepting my invite.
Oh, it's a great opportunity to meet in person, have a conversation with someone I'm very curious about.
Definitely. I'm more curious to hear about your story, but also the wisdom that you have. I think to start off our conversation, I think I came across your work from your famous TEDx talk. I found it as very powerful.
Yeah.
I think the title for it was Fear is the Future. And soon as I hit listen, and it kind of took me back to the journey that I was going through at that time, my relationship with fear and understanding how the fear was framed. So I think I'd like to start our conversation with that note, if you allow me to.
Yeah.
I know it's such a counterintuitive thought to frame fear as the future. And because from our childhood and the society, we've always been taught that fear is something that is should escape from or to be protected from. So where does this realization come from for you, that fear as a future?
I think, so if I go back to 2014 when I turned my life upside down in pursuit of, I had a very successful career. I had ticked all the boxes I was told would make me successful. I had the big house with the white picket fence. I bought an Audi A5 with cash in the driveway. I was 39 years old, you know. I had the corporate title. I was travelling all around the world. I'd done all the things, and I came from a working class family. And I got to the point where I was like, is this it? I was told if I did all this stuff, I would be happy. And it wasn't that I was unhappy, but I was like, I'm not fulfilled. And so when I stepped back, and plus my son was 3 years old at the time, and what was interesting about that was we were doing everything for the future. Everything we did was in the future. I was never present. And when you have a 3-year-old, you realise all they want, like now. I asked myself, what is it that success looks like for me on my terms rather than the societal definition of success? When I did that, it was human connection, positively impacting the lives of others, sharing experiences and being present in the moment. And that was all I knew to be true. And that I was like, well, these are all the things I'm sidelining in my pursuit of happiness. And I think that was when I was like, I can't continue like this. Like it had been going on for 2 years, this inner, like the fear inside of me had been churning for 2 years. It's like, this doesn't feel right. You've got everything that you could possibly want. You should be grateful. But we're afraid because if we turn everything upside down, then what? Who are you without all of this stuff that defines you? And I did something crazy. I was like, well, I'm going to turn everything upside down. So I left the 16-year career at the top of my game. I relocated my family from Perth back to Melbourne. I left an 18-year relationship. Wow. And I started my own purpose-driven company because I knew I couldn't be the only person that wanted to have a more meaningful and fulfilled life. and live success on my terms. And that was the first moment, I reckon, that I ever really fully stepped into fear. And whilst it was completely destabilising, and I don't advocate anyone does it, but I can sit here 10 years on and go, that was the moment when I realised that the fear is the pathway to everything you've ever wanted. That was the beginning. So when you say, where did this kind of begin? I was like, and that was when I got really curious about what fear is in terms of how we define it, but how we can redefine it, how our body responds to fear physiologically, and what does the science say, and equally what does my lived experience say when I actually lean into the fear that feels unsafe but's not life-threatening, but aligned to the things that are meaningful to me.
That's very powerful, and what a way to start the conversation. And it got me thinking into like defining fear, because how do we define fear? And like from your journey, I feel like it's one of the biggest leap of, I don't say a leap of faith, but actions you've taken to leave a stable career of 16 years, a relationship and stability in your corporate life, and also the belongingness. For an example, I think you lived in a state, is that where you lived all your life?
No, I lived in Melbourne, and I was transferred to Perth as part of my role. So I got a promotion, they sent me to Perth. My whole life was paid for, like literally lived in a mansion. Everything was paid for. Every cent I earned was saved. Like it was the dream job, and so I was like, which is very first world problem, right? But you have to ask the question, how is it that most of the mental health issues we have in the world and at scale are in countries that are the richest?
Well, that's a question. That's a really deep question to ask, because I understand. If I look at from my own journey, I also took that leap of faith or decision towards my journey, but the decision that the purpose was different. For me to migrate and leaving everything behind, and then just pack my bags and migrate to a country where I had no one. I had zero relatives, friends.
Really?
Yeah, I had just basically came here and start all over again. And the reason for that was that, again, the fear was there, but the reason was is not finding fulfillment. In that moment, I had no choice for me to take that decision to support the family. But again, that moment helped me to understand that as a part of fear, because even from that moment, getting into the airport and not knowing what it's going to be, even though what you read and if you have some kind of information about it, I had no other information for me to understand what it's going to be like. So that itself, I feel, is the part for me that shaped my curiosity and leaning into fear. But I find it so interesting. I wanted to ask Penny, it's just diving into that at that moment when you were taking that decision. When the societies developed or shaped us to think fear as a way to go against it and then protect ourselves, I'm curious to ask from your story, what was that upbringing like, and how was that journey for you to take that decision, and were there any blockers?
Yeah. So what I now know, because as I say, we're now 11 years I think from that moment, is a couple of things. One is generally from when someone starts thinking about doing something seriously disruptive in their life that, could make them happier, to when they act is between 2 to 3 years of rumination.
2 to 3 years?
2 to 3 years. And that's if they do act. Because a lot of people will ruminate and never act, right? They want to change, but they just can't take the leap. I was always sitting there going, why can't I do this? But I now understand that the 2 years is generally the process of sitting there and evaluating, like you say, it could go this way, it could go that way, because the brain is brilliant, particularly at telling you all the reasons why you shouldn't, you couldn't, you can't. Yeah. But equally, we don't lend enough space in the brain to consider, but what if it all just worked out? What if it all went amazing? So when you say blockers, I think the greatest blocker we have is we have a bias in the brain to the negative. And so the way we're wired as humans is we assess every situation for risk and reward with a bias more towards risk. Like, what if things go wrong? That is the greatest barrier, which is why I say when we can reframe our relationship with fear, it reframes our relationship with risk in an intentional and considered way, and allows us to see fear as the opportunity when it's not life-threatening and aligned with values. So the first barrier, as I say, I think is the bias to the negative. So trying to overcome that and allowing yourself to do that and giving yourself, like time is, it's okay to take time to consider. I think the other barrier, I hate saying this, but it's like, gosh, I work a lot with women, particularly high-performing women, and I see it all the time. We care so much what other people think. Mm-hmm. So I was like, people are going to think I'm crazy. They're going to be like, why would you leave an executive career in a global giant? You're on this trajectory. You earn amazing money. You've got everything. Like, what is wrong with you? And to do it, to step away and completely, I left that whole identity. Didn't become a corporate consultant, which I see a lot of people leave corporate and do. I literally walked away and said, I want to do something completely different that helps humans flourish. And I don't really know what that looks like. I don't have a clear plan, which, again, my peers, it's like, what do you mean you don't have a plan? We don't invest in a project unless there's a 500-line item spreadsheet that's approved with budget before we go ahead. So it just goes against the grain of everything you're taught when you're in a corporate environment. And so that fear of judgment was huge for me. And what was fascinating was when I told people I was leaving, I will never forget it, so many people were like, well, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to start something. Well, what are you going to start? And I'm like, well, it kind of has these things in it, but I'm not 100% sure. And they're like, they literally said it, you're crazy. Like, what are you doing? No one leaves Shell because it's such a high pay, great job. Yeah. But the interesting thing was, and again, I wasn't very connected back then to my intuition, not consciously. Something in my gut, the more people told me I was crazy, made me realise that this was the right thing to do. I can't explain it, but there was this voice within me going, you have to do this. There's a reason why people have such a resistance. And what I now realise is most of those people wanted to change but didn't have the courage to do it. So they project. Do you know what I mean? That your shift makes them feel uncomfortable.
Wow. I wanted to pick up on those two because it's fascinating for me. The intuitive side, you touched on the body's connection. I will get into it. But also like the negativity bias and that, like I think you tried to explore that from that decision onwards and in your line of work as well, behavioral scientist. And then the other work that you've done. I was always curious to know in my own journey as well, the difference between that intuitive fear, because where does that negativity bias, like towards the bias towards negativity comes from? Is it through culture, the conditioning, or is it something biological, like as human or beings, that fear comes from to that negativity? Where does it come from?
Oh, I think it's biological. So from everything I've studied, fear is built in. It is a built-in warning system. And it goes back to when we were cave people. It's why we have an amygdala, which a piece in our brain that is pretty much unevolved from back in caveman times. And so what would happen would be, we'd be in the cave, the saber-toothed tiger would be at the door, and your body had two immediate responses, which were part of what they call the autonomic nervous system. It's automatic. You don't think, like your body takes over when you're under threat. And so it would be the first one was freeze. When we first formed, we only had the freeze option. And I think what happened, human adaptability, was that didn't serve us too well. Too many people froze and maybe got eaten. Yeah. And so then from, the autonomic nervous system evolved and you ended up with flight, which was another automatic response, and then fight, okay? So you've got fight, flight and freeze. Yep. So the sympathetic nervous system, I just want to get this right because I always get confused. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight and flight, I think. Yep. The parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, is where freeze sits. So freeze actually sits in a different part, okay? And now, I think it's only been in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, they've found that there's another automatic response, which is very common in women, which is called fawning. And what happens is when we feel threatened, what will happen, we will automatically kick into people-pleasing overdrive. So it's like, how do I not rock the boat? How do I get everybody back to a position where they're all happy? And so it's just constant people-pleasing. So we have 4 responses now in the autonomic nervous system. And so what happens is when you feel threatened, So now what happens is that system's repurposed itself, because most of us are not in life-threatening situations every day. And the best example I can think of is your mobile phone, right? So you reach into your pocket, you can't find your mobile phone. Your autonomic nervous system, for most people, will kick in. That is considered a fear or a threat, because most people are so attached to their devices. And so what your default response is, and most of it, it's not to say you can't activate the others, but most of us will have a default response when we feel threatened. So for me, I go into fight mode immediately. Mm-hmm. That's just my default. Do you know what yours is?
I think flight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I avoid. Yeah. I avoid and I flight in terms of conflicts, and it's my own reflection. I think flight is where I'm mostly aligned with.
Yep.
Understanding how I manage conflicts or a threatening situation, I just avoid it. I fly. Remove yourself. Yeah.
So you understand what your default position, which awareness is always the first step to any change, right? So that's really helpful, because now what will happen when you flight next, you'll go, I remember that conversation with Penny. This is me doing that thing. And what happens is you know now that it's automatic, right? And so when your autonomic nervous system kicks in because you feel threatened, it shuts down the rational reasoning centres of your brain and puts your body pretty much into survival mode. So your brain's like, let's conserve all of our resources and energy so that we can just get through what's in front of us. Because we've got to just get past that, because that's the threat. And once we do, we can work out on the other side. But you basically end up with blinkers on. It's why when we're afraid or feel threatened or, extremely uncomfortable, however you want to put it, mm-hmm. often we'll make irrational decisions. We will respond in ways that we don't expect. Often the inner child will come out, because we're not trained to deal with this. And the most powerful thing you can do in these situations is the simplest, and that is to breathe. Because breathing brings you back into your body, your physicality. It brings you back into the present moment, because this kind of takes you offline, and it kicks the rational brain back in. So just sitting there and taking a deep breath, and no one needs to even notice that you're doing it, is the best way to pull yourself out of that situation. So fear is a built-in warning system that used to serve us in terms of keeping us alive, and still can to this day. Mm-hmm. But now for most of us, it's actually, I would say, something that holds us back from realising our potential and from exploring true possibility around the things that would make us happy, because they go against societal conditioning.
That's amazing. And thanks for that tip as well, because that was my next question for you. Like, how do you understand when you don't know, especially as you said, awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
Because I find even in my line of work, coaching other people, that people find it difficult to differentiate this intuitive fear, such as you touch fire and then you have a flight response to mm-hmm. protect yourself from danger, hurting yourself. That is an inbuilt system, as you mentioned. But the other part that people find it difficult to understand the difference is the psychological fear. Mm. I mean, that comes from, I think, your childhood experience, the culture, religion, and possibly events in your life. I'm curious to understand, from your experience, how do you differentiate this? Because if you walk out the door and then you see a threat, sometimes it could be practical. Yeah, you see a physical danger, it's rational. But sometimes, I feel people are limited in their actions. I would say procrastinate on taking some step, even they know this is the right thing to do, because of psychological fear. Mm. How does these two differentiate?
So I think you touched on a really interesting point. So fear is, I think, the feeling, but it's what triggers the fear. Yeah. Is where it gets interesting. So you can have fear that is triggered, as we mentioned, from a life-threatening situation. So I'm walking down a dark alley and someone's following me. That is where this innate warning system makes logical sense. If I frickin' run, it makes sense. Yeah. And that's where my autonomic nervous system is hell yes, I'm doing my job. And that is actually, that's a lifesaver, not a debilitator. What you're talking about is fear that I would say comes from either trauma in our life. And when I talk about trauma, because I studied with Dr. Gabor Maté, and I did his amazing compassionate inquiry course, which is probably the best training I've ever done in my life. I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in that space. And he changed my whole perception of trauma, because I always thought, and I think this is what happens with a lot of people think about trauma, it's I came from a war-torn country, or I had a horrific childhood where I was beaten, I had violent parents. which are horrible things, right? But we call that big T trauma. Like these are huge things where we all go, oh my God, that's horrific. But what we don't think about is what we call the little T trauma. Okay.
Right.
And we all have loads of that. And this little T trauma is what shapes our belief system.
Yep.
It shapes the stories we tell ourselves, which then informs what we decide to fear and what we don't. Okay. And so basically, if I give you an example, a little T trauma I was talking about this morning for me would be I used to love art. And when I was 15 years old, I got a really bad mark on something in my art class, and the teacher told me that I was not good at art. She said, you're not very good at this. And that, like, I would never, like 2 years ago, I would never call that a trauma. It is a trauma because trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. So trauma creates a physiological response. So it creates an imprint in your nervous system that basically says every time now or thereafter, without doing any work around that art story, every time I ever put myself in a position where I'm thinking that's a creative project or that's artistic, that story comes up and it's like, remember, you're not good at art. Don't try art. So this is where the fear comes in, because people will think it's crap again and you'll feel shit again, and that'll take me back to being 15 years old, so I just don't do it. So that's an example of, so we are sort of the makeup of all of these big T and little t traumas that create physiological imprints. We're often, like we say, we're not even conscious of where does this fear come from, but I'll guarantee you when it's not life-threatening, and this is what Gabor's work teaches us, this is why the inner child stuff actually exists, because it's real, right? We are all just children walking around in adults' bodies because we're never taught how to understand and process how these experiences shape the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we have about ourselves, and therefore what we're willing to step into or resist. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, because you were taking back to my childhood.
Yeah.
And then like I talk about it now, and I think I talk about it as part of my own healing journey. I think it was the comment that's grade 5 when I was a little kid, like one of, my mates and came and told me, hey, look, you don't talk that much. And like something like that comment like just stuck with me. And I didn't even realize when I later on, it came up and I was unconscious about it, like thinking that I'm not a good speaker. I can't talk that much. And even like I chose my profession as IT because I thought I cannot get into sales, anything related to media or presentations, because that is that comment. At that time, we were like 10-year-olds, grade 5. But I carried that, I don't know, probably unknowingly.
Yeah, you do. I'll bet you we could sit here and write a list.
Yeah.
And it's driven often, I think, that these traumas come from, and it's not that the person's intentionally trying to give you a trauma. And this is what I find interesting as well, right? Yeah. Most parents, traumatize their kids and don't realise it. Can I swear?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I always say, it's not, when you're a parent, it's not like it's not a matter of whether you'll fuck up. You absolutely will. It's how do you minimise the degree to which you fuck up? Because, we're human at the end of the day. And so all of these traumas, they're not intentional often, even people who are abusive, they always say the abuser comes from abuse more often than not. It's learnt behaviour. But so often the trauma comes from someone who, whether they're nice to us or not is not the point. It's someone that we admire, which is why it has an impact. Like I admired my art teacher. She was in a position of authority and power, and I respected her. So her opinion mattered to me, which is why it had an impact. If I didn't care about her opinion, it's like parents, you love your parents, you idolise them often when you're younger. So when they say something without realising it, that can create a little T trauma that you carry through for the rest of your life.
I wanted to ask, that's amazing, Penny. Like this little T trauma is very interesting for me, because I think I understand now what those little traumas are. And then from my own awareness journey and understanding of my inner child, it's a lot of work, I feel. I think everyone.
And it never ends, right?
It never ends. But if someone is like listening to this conversation and they realize I'm holding myself back on starting this business I always wanted to, or maybe going on this stage and accepting this invite, and they realize this little trauma from a previous event or something that they admired, like parents told this person. What is the first step?
Yeah, and so the happiest people in the world are those who are emo-diverse. And what that means is emotionally diverse, and this is proven by the science. And what we mean by emotionally diverse is that these are the people who actually feel all things and create the space for all feelings. So I think what happens is we're conditioned to sort of say, oh, we should be happy, we should be happy. Well, that we shouldn't be happy all the time, every minute of every day. That's not human. I mean, it's a Dalai Lama says to be human is to suffer. So we have to create space for all feelings. So the emotionally diverse are those people who create the space to feel the feelings, both the good and the bad, and actually allow them to be processed rather than suppress, which is what I think most of us do, the bad stuff, and just keep squashing it down and finding a distraction and moving past. It's why busy is such a great thing. Everyone loves busy because it means you get to live up here and you don't spend any of your time down here, and this is where your feelings live. And the more the two are disconnected, the more likely you are to have mental health issues. Okay? So what I always recommend is pen and paper. Okay, no computers for this work, right? Because there is a lot to be said for the hand-brain connection and writing out things, thinking, feeling, all of that sort of stuff. So I would say grab a pen and paper, sit down in a quiet space, literally 5 or 10 minutes, right, to start this process. I'm going to guarantee you it'll probably be very uncomfortable because, like I say, most of us will default to our heads because that's a safe space. Take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what is the thing that I'm resisting? Yeah. Write it down and then say to yourself, if I drop into my body, when I think about the resistance and that thing, what do I feel? Okay, label it. And it might be one feeling. It might be fear. Yeah, it might be anxiety. It might be afraid, whatever it is. Yeah. Then I want you to name where in your body that feeling lives.
Wow.
Okay, so immediately what you're doing is you're taking yourself out of here and into your body. And the reason this is powerful is because when you live up here, you're only realizing the potential of one out of the 3 brains that you have. So you have 3 brains. You have a head, a heart, and a gut. Okay, and you're only using a third of your brain if you live up here. So connecting into your body, naming the feeling, looking at where it lives, powerful as a start point. And then you might want to ask yourself, when was the first time I ever experienced this feeling? If I go back as far as I can, when did this feeling first feel into my body? And I'll guarantee you, more often than not, most of us will be able to sit there. And, people with extreme trauma, it will be a lot more difficult. But often you can sit there and go, oh, my gosh, I remember when I was 10 years old and my friend told me I couldn't speak. So how could I now become someone who stands on stages and become a speaker, which is my dream, but I'm not meant to be good at that. So you start to, again, it's just awareness. You start to create awareness in the body of how feelings feel, which creates that connection. And then you start to understand, well, that's a story. That feelings are information, they're not facts. Yeah. And so use them as information and just write down what comes up and just sit with it. Like you don't have to dwell on it, you don't have to overthink it. Just start to create the opportunity to connect here to here. The other thing that I absolutely love, if that is too far a stretch to start with, write down the question you want to answer. So why can't I be an entrepreneur? And then what I want you to do is I want you to ask that question to your head. Then I want you to ask that question to your heart and ask that question to your gut. And I'll guarantee you will get 3 very different answers. And then you start to understand how it's almost like we have multiple people living within us. And often they're coming at things from different perspectives.
Wow, that is amazing insight. It's like a masterclass.
But it's simple, right?
It seems quite simple, like getting a pen and paper, writing, using your hands to write it, and then just naming that feeling, like what you're feeling, trying to label it, what you are feeling. That is the first step of awareness. And then understanding, what is blocking me to take this step right now, or why do I feel the way I do right now? It's just sometimes simple as that. But I think if I take a step back, I find from evolution or from these cultures and how we've all divided into different spiritual based practices and all that, humans have disconnected from the body. I don't know, even like for me, when I was reading, I understand, like, I come from like even Lord Buddha initially denied the body. There was a denial of the body, and then but he couldn't achieve enlightenment by doing that.
I love that, yeah.
Because he just denied the body and didn't like made it suffer, not eating and understanding. It's just like this, because humans, I think at some point of evolution, realized that didn't want to agree the animalistic nature of the body.
Yep.
And the connection between the mind and the body, so that we just took different routes. But I wanted to ask, like, why, if someone is not really connected with the body, I find that a lot in the work that I do.
Yep.
They're always like very intellectual, but using maybe one part of the brain, but like understanding that awareness in the body. Sometimes if you say, write down what you feel in the body, you're feeling what you feel in your chest or throat or shoulders or your gut. Sometimes I find that people are not as connected and they don't know how to put it down.
I see the exact same thing all the time, and it's like anything, right? It's a practice. It's like building a muscle, right? And the only way you get good at this, it's like going to the gym to reconnect with your body. You need to practice it, and that's why I say it'll be uncomfortable the first time you do it. That's why I journal every day, to try and drop myself in at least once a day to make it a practice, because that is what it is. It is a practice. It is uncomfortable, and that's why I say the work is never done. Doesn't matter how much of this stuff you do, there's always tension within in some way, shape or form. But what I see a lot of is people get so good at suppression of feelings because it's how, particularly people who are high performing and successful.
Okay.
Right. It's, I was raised this way. It's like, be stoic, just get on with it, pull on your big girl pants, life's tough, be resilient, which was brilliant and served me in getting to where I got to.
Yep.
But it's equally held me back.
Yep.
Because like I say, it's only been the last 10 years and from doing the work that I now do that I realise there's just so much more within me when these two things are connected. And you will observe this. What I find fascinating is when you get really good at suppressing what's going on within, it's almost like an automatic response. So I've done it with clients many times where I'm like, okay, and I'm going to take you out of your head and we're going to just drop into your body and just notice what comes up. And it's almost like the body will like just bounce them back because it's like an automatic, it's like, no, we're not safe here. And again, it's fear kicking in. It's that autonomic nervous system. We're not safe here. And so it's like the flight response is to take them up. And so it's, like I said, it's something that needs to be done for some people very gently. It's something that needs to be done over time. Like when I did my training with Gabor, like it's like anything. People have got to be ready to do this work and know that it's not going to be easy, particularly if they have suppressed pretty much everything they feel for quite some time.
Wow, I understand, like, I know that Dr. Gabor Maté is someone I find like he's one of the most important people in the planet right now, in my view. His work.
I completely agree with you. Yeah.
His work and the teachings of him. I know that you mentioned that it was a life-changing experience and what you learned on this compassionate inquiry. So if you try to align fear, the clients you've helped and the work that you do, and then the teachings and the experience you've got from this compassionate inquiry, more the trauma healing, that based approach, how does that shape now your experience and the way you coach people from your learnings from that?
It's so interesting. Like when you're in this space, like you and I, like this constant evolution of self. So 2 years ago, I never really used the word compassion. Okay. And it's not that I didn't like it. It just, like I was doing a lot of work on stages in corporate environments. I work with professionals in both entrepreneur and executive spaces. No one talked really about compassion, and it was just a word that I didn't use. There's been a lot of talk about empathy. Yep. Right? That comes up a lot as a buzzword now, which we can touch on because I find that really interesting. But not a lot of work around compassion. And it was almost like, life gives you what you need when you need it. I started studying psychology 5 years ago, and that was what led me to Gabor's work, because I started to see in clients, all of the psychology stuff was really helpful. However, most clients had these unconscious blocks that they couldn't get past. Okay. And I was like, I can't do my work properly if I don't work out how to support them in removing these blocks. And I started to look into trauma because I'd done 10 subjects in psychology in my first layer of studies. Not one of them touched on trauma. And I was like, how can this be? Like,
Wow.
yeah, wow. Welcome to the Western world. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a gap, I'm going to go and fill it. So I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with the world's best. So I went and did some research on Gabor, and I was like, okay, I'll do this program. And I'm like, well, I think I want to study trauma, but this is called compassionate inquiry. And it was so profound to me. I was like, oh, I'm going to do it because he's the best. And I think what has shifted for me fundamentally is how compassion now permeates every component of my work and my being. Because from there, so what I realised from his work is that it is very hard to support others fully if you are not compassionate to self. And I think compassion for self is one of the things that we are most lacking in society, which is why I think particularly in the current environment, we're so not skilled at being truly compassionate to others. And when we talk about compassion, I think the definition is really important to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Yep.
Empathy is, apparently, I can put myself in your shoes and I can understand the discomfort that you're feeling. Compassion is, I see you are suffering and I am willing to take steps to try and support you in alleviating that suffering. Okay? So it's not about fixing you or taking things away. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can be having a hard conversation and being honest with you, but doing it with care. It's changed my work fundamentally because now I did my thesis in compassion and understanding compassionate decision-making, what actually drives us to act compassionately towards others. I did the study with Gabor, which has made me a hell of a lot more compassionate to myself, which is something I have been very flawed at for many years. So one of the most powerful questions I learned from that is just asking yourself, what would compassion look like for me today? How often do you do that? When you're feeling crappy, what would self-compassion look like for me today? And it might be as simple as I'm going to go walk the dog in bare feet. And it's game-changing, right? And then now that has now evolved into my next white paper and my next body of research, which is all about this emergent field out of Harvard called Wise Compassionate Leadership, which is a leadership framework that completely aligns with how women have told me they innately want to lead, but are still told to tone down or suppress. And Wise Compassionate Leadership, which is doing hard things humanely, I think is what the world is missing at the moment. I've been running a couple of programs, workshops in it with over 150 people in the last 2 weeks. And the response to this way of leading and how to embody it in the corporate environment has been profound. So it's permeated everything I do.
Wow. It seems like the experience has been magical for you, like life-changing, the way you approach your coaching and how you help people out, especially in the leadership space.
Yeah.
Isn't that? Compassionate, when you talk about compassion, I think I was thinking about, my definition of compassion, I think you're right. Like sometimes we are fed that compassion needs, maybe it's more empathy. You're just understanding what the other person or trying to see the lens, but not just compassionate towards yourself, right? Like as a coach, I am always doing the work to service others, but what am I doing to service myself when I need it?
Yep.
In your line of work, because like I wanted to get into the corporate leadership and training.
Yep.
How often do you find this part of people not being aware of being compassionate towards themselves, and why?
It's so funny, like my stomach is like screaming at me, and I think we are so starved of compassion. And the reason I think we're starved of compassion is I think that we have prioritized busy. Busy is what we value, and compassion takes time and feels slow and unproductive. So it's one of those things that goes against what we think society values or what is going to get us ahead. But what is fascinating is it's one of those things that if you actually create more space for it and allow yourself to go slower, you will move quicker than anyone else. And the science proves that. Compassionate leadership outperforms any other leadership model in terms of like organisations that allow people to embody it and individuals who fully embody it. So when you say why, like, so what was your question? It was around leaders and
like in a world driven by external metrics,
Yeah.
where like leaders, especially when you go up the ladder, the pressure becomes so high for you to maintain a certain image, or just a performance driven culture, which are the metrics are driven towards outer performance,
Yeah.
like the industry, not just internal performance, right? And then I feel like even from me in my corporate days, like there was no metrics or model to evaluate how you feel and what is your own growth journey, what is your healing journey, for an example. When that is not set up, and when you're defined, like your job is to just go there and whatever, take up the stress and then just do it, kind of a busy type of culture, how can leaders be like compassionate towards themselves, and what is missing in this corporate world?
Well, so I think that it's obvious the absence of compassion is what makes the workforce so toxic. And we see this, it's like productivity has become the disease, right? It has. It's why this, like, burnout is at rates we've never seen. Levels of anxiety are at rates we've never seen. So when you say, well, how, where would a leader even begin? Like, how could, I think the first thing is that you acknowledge the fact that the way you're leading is not serving you, and it's not serving others. So you might be great at performance, but if you're completely burnt out, and you feel disconnected, do you really think that you're operating at your optimal? Because I can tell you, you're not, right? And it's not sustainable. Eventually, you'll probably wake up and not be able to get out of bed. It's a matter of time when you're operating like that. So I think the first thing is being aware of the fact that you're not happy with the way things are anymore and acknowledging that. And then the second thing is understanding, like, well, what would compassion look like for me in this situation? Like, start with self, right? And it's interesting. I've been doing all this research, as I say, on high-performing women around their perceptions of leadership and how they want to lead. And it's just become... It's so obvious, but it's so true. It's like, how can you lead others if you have not built skill in self-leadership? And I think that's where the disconnect is. That leadership, when we look at it, doesn't start with self. We look at it as this person out in front leading others. And it's like, at what point has that person done the work to actually say, well, what would it look like to lead myself in a way that is in alignment with my values, which enables me to show up as who I really am, which would make me an authentic leader, which we talk about all the time. We want authentic leaders, but again, what comes through in my research is we talk about wanting authentic leaders. We talk about wanting to leverage diversity. We talk about wanting to be inclusive. These things are talked about, to the nth degree, and yet what the evidence shows is that it's tokenism. We don't want it because it slows things down. It disrupts the status quo. It means we have to look at things through a different lens, which again might make things a little bit more challenging until we get to a point where a better solution comes out. We've gotten to this point where speed comes at the compromise of, I would say, humanity, of what is best for society, of what is sustainable. I mean, I think we have to start asking ourselves, how do I slow down in order to lead myself better and therefore be able to lead others?
I think that's a profound message, Penny. I think that the idea and the message you're sharing is you have to acknowledge where you are at. What you are doing, is it aligning with your values? If you are not happy, you have to lead yourself first for you to lead better the other people, right? I think that's what the disconnect is, and compassion and all these things, especially I feel like people are not really aware of those. And then it's just like sometimes the responsibility is for you to start your own journey before you get into and call it a culture toxic or whatever, right? And I think that's the message that we are like trying to convey from your research as well, that the importance of you taking the step, your own inner work. Because whether you're a parent, whether you're a leader, whether you're a person who has went through a traumatic journey, I think there is this choice for you to start your own healing journey.
Without a doubt. And I think it's so underrated, and equally I don't think a lot of people think about it until they get to I bet you see it. Most people don't come to me until they're at a point where they're like, I just don't know what else to do. Like, I've tried everything. I can't do this on my own. I need help. They've got to get to that point to be ready to do that work. It's, it happens, but it's more rare that people are like, you know what? Things are good, but I just feel like there's more work to be done on me. Normally there's a catalyst for that. Often it's burnout.
Wow. Leading into our later stage of our conversation, I know that in your, refer back to your original, the TEDx speech, you talk about the importance of vulnerability. And I think in Latin terms, vulnus is your capacity to be wounded.
Wow.
I think that's one of the best definitions I've heard on vulnerability. You're allowing yourself to be wounded. And I find it very interesting, Penny, because I think in growth, whether it's self-growth, we are talking about your own growth, how important it is to be vulnerable, whether you're a leader, whether you're like someone else, just going through your own journey. Can you grow out of your current phase without being vulnerable? Why is this vulnerability is important in today's world?
I keep thinking back to one of the practices that I talk about in the TED Talk, but that has enabled me, to, whether it's vulnerability or whether, Brené Brown talks about getting comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of the same thing. And I always was like, that's really interesting because, again, it comes back to where we started about vulnerability is about seeing fear as the pathway and doing that thing even though it makes you feel really uncomfortable. That is vulnerability. And so micro-bravery is this practice I came across very early in my journey because I was like, well, how do you teach people to get comfortable with discomfort so they could, because it's when you do teach people how to be vulnerable and they, again, see it they can embody it as a practice, they start to realise that the things they were terrified of often don't play out the way they thought. They're often not as bad because we're very good at catastrophizing. We have a bias to the negative. And so micro-bravery is doing one small thing every day that makes you feel uncomfortable, but that aligns with your values, right? So to your point earlier, it might be from a career perspective, it might be reaching out to someone you've long admired who's got an amazing career that you'd love to explore, something along those lines, and saying to them, would you create some space and allow me to buy you a coffee? That might be your micro-bravery. My micro-bravery now, because I've been practicing this for 10 years, might be completely different. Like I stood on a stage and delivered a keynote in my bathing suit in front of 150 women to show them the power of getting comfortable with discomfort and how it can connect with others. Now, I'll never do that again. But it went viral and created this whole movement. And I still get jobs from this day from doing that because it's such a known moment that no one else has ever done. But it was intentional and it was in alignment with my values. So micro-bravery is the best way to learn how powerful vulnerability is. Do one thing every day that makes you feel uncomfortable but is in alignment with your values. And there's a brilliant practice you can attach to this called 100 Noes. This is brilliant. So your goal is to put 100 Noes on a piece of paper, stick it on a wall somewhere where you'll see it every day. And you need to get out there and get your 100 Noes. So 100 Noes is basically, I want you to ask for all the things you've ever wanted but been too afraid to ask for, no matter what it is, right? So, and this is your way to practice micro-bravery. I'm going to go out today, I'm going to get a no, but the no is going to be in alignment with my values and something that's important or meaningful to me. So basically, you're normalising a no. And so every no you get, every time someone rejects you and goes, you know what, I don't want to be on your podcast, win. This is a win. I tick it off my 100 no's and I'm one more closer to getting that 100. But here's what happens is every rejection, every no you get moves you closer to a bigger yes. And the yeses you'll get if you practice the 100 no's will blow your mind, I'll guarantee you, because what will happen is it changes your relationship with fear and vulnerability because you realise, like I say, that we make things so much bigger and so much worse than what they are when we ruminate in our head rather than release them out into the world. And I can guarantee you, like, the things that have happened in the last 10 years for me, off the back of that process, There was no way 10 years ago, if you had have told me I would have been on the TED Melbourne stage, I would have written for Harvard Business Review, I would have got a book deal, I would have spoke at Google in Silicon Valley. Like these things, I would have just said, you're insane. It was never in my plan. It was all born out of just continuing to step into those acts of micro bravery, continuing to try and get 100 no's. And guess what? People started saying yes.
I'm blown away.
So now your job is to, I want you to get your 100 no's. I want to hear
100 no's, like that's such a profound exercise. I haven't even thought about it. I think it's helping me out right now.
Yeah.
Because I understand, like it's easier for someone listening to understand rationally. Yeah, like it makes sense. The fear exists in me and you rationally understand, but how to manage, how to see, like as you say, how to dance through this fear.
Oh, I like that. Dance, yeah. Dance with the fear.
Dance
though.
with the fear.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes people find it so difficult to take this step because the step sounds too big for them to take at that stage. So that's where this micro bravery comes in. And when you say it in a way, this 100 no's.
It's tiny. Like I say, it could be really small. Like I pitch myself constantly to publications, to write for them. I recently pitched to Forbes and I didn't hear back. I mean, that's, a ghost. It's a no. But what's happened now is I don't stop. I'm like, okay, well, I'll try a different angle or I'll go a different way or I'll change my follow-up process. And that's the other thing. Sometimes we take ghosting as a no. And I cannot tell you, I have a full-blown follow-up process when pitching myself for anything. Mm-hmm. If I don't hear back, so it's kind of like just because you don't hear back from someone, it is not often a no. Like we've spoken about, so many people are busy, right? A lot of the people that I deal with in the professional world are getting up to 200 emails a day. Mm-hmm. So you think about, I land in their email inbox, I'm number 147 for the day, right? How important is what I'm giving in the context of the other, 199 emails, right? So following up, like not harassing, but I have a process where I follow up a week later. And then if I don't hear back, I follow up 10 days later. And then if I don't hear back, I follow up 2 weeks later. And then I do one last hit, right? Probably, again, maybe about 2 weeks after that. And then I let it go. The amount of people on that third follow-up, particularly in the corporate world, that will come back and go, I'm so glad, because I'll actually say, just jumping back to the top of your inbox, that actually come back to me and say, oh my God, I'm so glad you sent that email. I've been meaning to get to you. And I get work out of it. And I'm not harassing people. It's all, it's not salesy. It's just understanding what you're dealing with. And that is, most people are living in here. Yeah, their day is completely distracted and they're completely overwhelmed with the amount of messages that they're getting. So how do you actually be visible and follow up in a way that is meaningful?
It's very practical for someone like, especially the people that I help in job search as well. They get this a lot. Like I send one message and then I get ghosted and then they immediately create assumptions. Assumptions that I'm not good enough, and then add fire to that thought process of that maybe I'm not good enough to set out for this job. Maybe like, I don't know, and then again fear-based thoughts comes in.
And that's where, we were talking about before, that's where your opportunity is to get that pen and paper and drop into your body. So what's the feeling behind that story? Where does that feeling live? When did I first feel that feeling of not enoughness? And again, you start to unravel. It's nothing to do with the job. Because it's not, and that's what's interesting, right? There's this whole story that goes back to our childhood that we're now attaching to a job application just because no one's responded. What an opportunity.
Wow. This has been a magical conversation, Penny. I think I know that I can go on about it, but I'm sure I will touch base with you because I have few things that I wanted to discuss. But I think for today, I'm very thankful for your time. And it's been like, we started on fear, we went into vulnerability and how fear comes up in the body, which is like, I find it very fascinating. It's something I'm learning as well, which we most like overlook, the body's connection to the mind and the body. And then the practical steps that you shared, I think it's like a gold mine.
And like you said, I think if nothing else, if people just take away that all of this stuff is a practice, right? Like I say, I'm 10 years into this now and I still have to call myself out Just this morning I woke up and I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm spending way too much time on that. Like, it sucked me in again. And I'm like, right, what are the practices? What are the things I'm going to put in place so I can actually create the space to be fully in here? So like I said, it's a practice. And you'll have good days and bad days, but it's the practice that makes us feel more aligned with the life that we want to live. I've absolutely loved this. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm dying to hear a podcast on your 100 Noes.
100 Noes.
That's a podcast in itself.
That is a podcast in itself, and I am going to take action on it, head to hand. I know it's in my head still, but I think now I have a commitment to put it into hands and 100 Noes.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm already thinking 20, 30 Noes of I can write off. Yes. Yeah. Penny, we wrap up our Unlayered conversations with one question. What's one thing in your career or life that you have unlearned?
Have you got one?
Wow. For me, I have a few. For me, I think most recent one is like, it's just you. For me, I have a difficult upbringing from my childhood, and then like being the elder kid, like it's my own healing journey of having to carry the whole family on my shoulders. So sometimes what I unlearned is like, it's not always my responsibility.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I can feel that.
Yeah. That's one thing I've unlearned.
Because it's a weight. Like, I can feel the weight of that responsibility. I think for me, I heard this saying once and I was just like, oh God, imagine if we all just came to each other with that at the forefront. And that is that we're all just doing the best we can with what we've got where we're at. And I think when we walk into a room or walk into a connection with that mindset, it creates conditions for compassion. And the other thing that I have unlearned, and this is why I touched on earlier, I can't connect with the word empathy. And it's not that I am not someone who is caring, and why I have a bias to compassion. I do not believe you can ever put yourself in someone else's shoes fully. I don't believe I can sit here and feel what you feel the way you feel it. Because as we've spoken about today, and I think that it's unreasonable for us to say that that is a skill. Because how can I ever, with your lived experience, with your background, right, and even the way you feel things is completely different to me, because you might have a higher sensitivity to, say, fear than I do. That is just the way, because we all have different traits within us. So for me, I never try, like, empathy is something that I've had to sideline, because I'm like, I can't really put myself in your shoes and feel what you feel, but I can sit here and acknowledge that I can see that you're suffering, and I can hold space in support of helping you alleviate that suffering in some way, shape or form without trying to fix you. So that's what I have unlearned. I've unlearned empathy, which is probably not what you thought you'd hear. And I've unlearned trying to come to every situation, all gung-ho, and instead just trying to sort of say, we're all just doing the best we can with what we've got where we're at. I don't think anyone really shows up truly and wants to be an asshole or a pain in the butt.
Wow, that's beautiful, Penny. Thanks for introducing me to the real meaning of compassion. And I think that's what I will take away from our conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.